So the new Adidas Predator, huh? It definitely passes the vibe check, but is actually also a great football boot to play with. And if you didn't know, this is the 21st generation of the Predator, and since we're here today, I figured why not go through all of the 21 generations to let you guys know where this all came from. And there's nostalgia in here, so John. But as you may know, it all started back in 1994 and a few years earlier, where ex-pro player Craig Johnston was teaching some kids on how to apply swerve on the ball. Now, he basically told them to do like you do when you play table tennis, but the kids said that, well, you know, table tennis bats have rubber on them, they have grip on them, and football boots don't. So something appeared in Craig's brain, and he thought, why not go home, strip a table tennis bat off the rubber, and then slap it on a pair of football boots. So he did that, and then he went to Addy, who looked at him and said, no, we're not gonna do that. But Craig was an insisting man, so he took the boots to the leadership in FC Bayern Munich, who are very close with Adidas. They tried the boots, they're ex-pros, they loved it, and, you know, through the back door, Addy came to find out about it. And that's how the Predator 94 came about. So you have these really aggressive rubber elements that were almost like little teeth. You obviously have a very, you know, it's a heavy boot, but you have these little crocodile scales on it to really emphasize that it is a very almost animalistic boot, and it was completely new back in the day. Innovation, huh? And then 1 year after, Adidas launched the Predator Rapier, which cut down a little on the size and the amount of the rubber fins, and then they also added the fold-over tongue, just to give that Predator vibe to us. Now, the funny thing is that the boot we have here with the crocodile scales is actually not the top model. It looks like this, and it doesn't have the crocodile scales. It has this funny stitching, and you can see on this is what you're looking for, the gray piece in the tooling when you're looking for a, you know, early Predator top models. So a little bit of a different look, but kept those OG vibes intact. And still heavy. And then came 1996 and the Predator Touch, which, I mean, it's starting to look like a Predator you can all recognize, probably because of the red fold-over tongue that was introduced on the Touch. And again, added a scale down on the size and the number of the rubber fins. So the Touch is also a touch, pun intended, lighter than the previous Predators. And you might also remember it as the boot David Beckham wore when he scored that goal from midfield against Wimbledon. Oh, and it came in more colors, which was a first as well. It's cool. And then probably one of the most iconic Predators came in 1998, the Predator Accelerator, which obviously brought this whole wavy design with the big stripes and that red wave underneath. But we also got, again, smaller fins that were actually just now sitting almost inside of the leather, really gave a big clean striking surface, in part also thanks to that asymmetrical lacing that Adidas introduced. And the Accelerator also brought us the feature wear outsole, which is this anatomical outsole that back in the day, it was outlandish how good it felt, as if you were sinking into the boot, and it was a lot more welcoming than the Touch and the Rapier and the Cup that came before. Beautiful. And it also, they updated it in '99 to remove the little windows, but otherwise it was the same boot. And then it's 2000 and the Predator Precision, which, I mean, they changed quite a lot of things here, because gone are those, you know, the remnants of the OG Predator elements. Now they're more like these little almost brushes that actually also sat inside little pockets in the leather. It really felt more like an integrated part of the boot. Obviously you have that big red tongue with the Velcro, that's a difficult word, with the Velcro strap, so you could actually really fold it over and it stayed there instead of flapping all the time, which was a great idea, but it just really didn't work all that well when it got dirty. And obviously also, you can't really see it here, but it introduced the Extraction outsole, where you had interchangeable metal studs. And they were big, they could kill a man, so very interesting and iconic. But I mentioned how the Accelerator was arguably one of the most iconic Predators. Well, this might just take the cake as the most iconic Predator. 2002 Predator Mania. And it might be that you're young, but even though I think you recognize it also, they've made a couple of remakes. But the OG here took the Predator fins and they moved them exclusively to the inside of the foot, or the medial side of the foot. Then they introduced the elasticated rubber band to the fold-over tongue, which meant that you didn't have to deal with all that Velcro stuff. They also introduced that external heel content that gave a bit more stability and obviously protection. And also they kept on with the Extraction studs. iconic, beautiful. I love how those Predator fins almost extend as a wave under the tongue onto the side. Beautiful. So then we move into 2004 with the Predator Pulse, and things change quite drastically here because the Predator elements, you can't really see them now, but they were scaled down once again and were only these little strips on the inside of the boot. Still pretty grippy, but definitely a lot less obvious than they were on the Precision and the Mania. Then, of course, they also added this little weighted piece in the forefoot, the Power Pulse element, 40 grams under the forefoot that was supposed to add more power to your shot. Some will call it a gimmick, some will say that it worked, but it was there. So it had the Mania vibes and then continued into the Pulse. But the years went by and we're into 2006 with the Predator Absolute here, where Adidas wanted to keep what was really going well on the Predator Pulse, but obviously they also wanted to update it. So actually they scaled the amount of rubber fins down to only 3 on the instep here, but then instead added a lot of little strips of liquid rubber to make it less bulky, but still have lots of like tactility and grip on the ball. Obviously still a tongue, not the biggest, still had the elasticated rubber band, and obviously still the Power Pulse in the outsole as well. Gimmick or not, it was a cool boot. Not my personal favorite though, but we're gonna get to that. And while this might not be my favorite Predator, the Predator Power Swerve from 2007 is definitely one of them. And I don't really know how much they changed from the Absolute, but it just feels so much better to me. So we still have the external heel counter, cool. Extraction, cool. But what they changed was that they now had not the Power Pulse in the sole, but they added this tungsten powder. So there was basically an air pocket in the sole with the tungsten powder that could then move as you swung your foot to change the momentum and change the dynamic of your shot. So you always had weight where you struck the ball. I mean, on paper, it sounds really cool, but it was just... Gimmick is a hard word to use, but I took it out and used the regular insole. Now what they also did was to have this 2.5mm smart foam underneath the striking surface and the Predator elements on the instep, which meant that you got like a millisecond more in contact with the ball that was supposed to improve the amount of swerve and power and precision you could add to your shot. The idea was that the more your foot is in contact with the ball, the more you can transfer all of that direction and energy to the ball. It might be what worked, but to me, the Power Swerve is one of the Predator GOATs. 2009 and the Predator X. And I mean, well, yeah, not a personal favorite of mine, I'll be honest. So they dropped the tongue, they dropped the fins, so they just had this almost zone of like little rubber duds. It was not exactly bad, but it didn't give the same amount of solidity that the fins on the Power Swerve had. They took out the tungsten powder, maybe because it was a little bit gimmicky, and then they introduced the Power Spine, again to add some solidity in the outsole and also prevent your foot from bending backwards and thus losing power. But the worst bit for me was that they went from kangaroo leather into Taurus leather. That's not a problem in itself, but the Taurus leather on the X was for me just not up to standards when it came to softness that we know from kangaroo leather. So, bit of a pass for me, but thankfully, things got better. With the Predator Adi Power, or Adi Power Predator, whatever you want to call it, from 2011. Now obviously things changed a bit because this is the launch colorway. It also came in that black-red iconic Predator colorway, but there was definitely some influence from the 2010 F50 Adi Zero that came in between these two boots. More color, and also it had the sprint frame outsole, which meant that it was a lot thinner and thus a lot lighter. The Adi Power weighed 230 grams. The good thing was that Adi had now found out how to work with Taurus leather, so it was really, really soft at the point where you could really tell a difference between Taurus and kangaroo leather. And also they added the fins back, kind of. At least the fins were a bit more solid. And then you had these little rubber dots from the X covering in between the fins as well. There was a new last as well. For me, the fit was absolutely phenomenal. And it actually has, well, the new Preds have shades of the Adi Power, which is a good thing. But what wasn't a good thing, necessarily, was that only a year after, Adidas scrapped the Adi Power and introduced the lethal zones. The good thing is that the LC is not a bad football boot, but what they did was to introduce Hyper Touch, so this synthetic leather that emulated all the good stuff from leather, but just had it as a synthetic that was a lot more water repellent and a lot lighter when it got wet, because it didn't really get wet. Now what they also did was to introduce 5 so-called lethal zones, where the pros were actually sat down with a blank football boot, and then they could draw with a marker pen where they wanted the individual zones for dribbling and striking the ball and chipping and precision shot, all that stuff, the pass pad. So they applied that, lots of SL rubber there, and then they introduced also, of course, the sprint frame with a MyCoach chip inside, or the hole for the MyCoach chip, which was, I mean, it was cool, you can measure all your data, but it never really worked all that well. So while the boots were solid, there was room for improvement. And it wasn't the Adi power. But I know a lot of people will love it. And then 2013, it had only been around for another year, but adidas just decided to update the lethal zones a little bit. The concept was the same, still hyper touch, still 5 SL rubber zones, but the pattern was it was changed a little bit, still had MyCoach. And it felt a lot like the same boot, but for me, ever so slightly sharper and slightly more nimble, which was definitely an improvement. The color though was wild. So there's that. And then came the World Cup in 2014, and with that, the Predator Instinct. And actually, it might as well have been called the Predator Lethal Zones 3, because it still had the Hyper Touch upper. It still had 5 SL rubber lethal zones that were actually slightly more emphasized and bigger than on the 2LCs, but they changed the name. Now, what they also did was to add, grippy spikes under the outsole, so if you did sole rolls, you also had more control. Whether that worked or not, I'll leave up to you guys, but I never really used it. But actually, this was also the last Predator for 4 years, because after this, Adidas scrapped everything they had and introduced instead the X, the Ace, and the Messi boots. So the last Pred for 4 years. But then after a couple of years of Ace, we went back to getting a Predator in 2018 with the Predator 18 Plus, where Adidas kept on with their full prime knit upper. Obviously the Plus was laceless, but you also had this new S-shaped curved heel, which meant that you got a lot more lockdown than you got in the 2 Ace boots that were laceless. And obviously also you had this new rib texture on the front foot that was supposed to mimic the Predator elements without actually being Predator SL rubber elements. You got that ribbed texture, but so it felt a bit like a Predator and it looked a bit like a Predator, but it was kind of for me at least, a bit of a transitional boot going back to the Predator. But the fact that it in itself brought the Predator back means that it's an important boot. Because if they didn't bring it back then, I don't think we would have a Predator today. And then there was the 2019 Predator 19 Plus, which was the 18 Plus with a rubber pad added at the heel. That's literally it. It's the same boot. Rubber pad on the heel. So. And then in 2020, things got tasty with the Predator Mutator 20 Plus, which is this beast where Adidas went in and really played with the silhouette of the boot. So it's still a full knitted upper, but you then had this enormous, gigantic collar that just, either you loved it or you didn't. But what was also new was the whole demon skin texture all over. So they brought back the SL rubber fins, actually 406 of them that were just scattered all over the boot. And the grip was unreal. If you took it on an AG pitch, I don't know how many times I've actually tripped shooting a video in a pair of Mutators, but the grip was unreal. Probably one of the grippiest Predators ever. So a little bit divisive, but definitely very defining for where the Predator was going, because SL rubber was back with a bang. And then in 2021, Adidas kind of gave the Mutator I don't want to call it a facelift, but it was definitely something that tasted like the Mutator. So you still had a lot of the little SL rubber fins, but the whole construction around the collar was a bit different and almost Nemesis-like with 2 bands that were overlaid on each other. But by and large, it felt similar to the Mutator and still grippy AF. It was wild. And it had these little SL rubber elements on the tongue part, which I don't know whoever used it, but hey, cool beans, I guess. And then came 2022, last year with the Predator Edge Plus, which was a bit rough for Adidas. They introduced bigger SL rubber fins, almost going back to the days of the Predator Lethal Zones, where you just had grip everywhere, right? It was still a knitted upper, but it was it was stiff as a board. There was new shape to the boot, so it was a little bit wider, but it also meant that the toe box was just, it was gigantic and very, very boxy. Of course, there was also the facet frame on the outsole, this little weighted piece under the forefoot, again going back to those power swerve and you know, Predator, it's called the Pulse, and the Absolute days, where you wanted a little bit of extra weight under your shot. But the thing was that the facet frame piece was 4 grams. So I don't really know how much of a difference it actually made. And for me, this, alongside the Edge, might be one of the worst Predators of all time. I did not like it. But thankfully, Adidas had kind of been there before with the Predator X, and they made a great boot after that, and the same thing happened earlier this year with the Predator Accuracy. Now obviously this is the Prada version, which is wildly expensive, wildly exclusive, and not for mere mortals. But the inline version brought us Hybrid Touch. It was an updated Hybrid Touch, but still super, super soft. And it got a slightly different shape to it, still very wide, still fully knitted upper. And then it went from those gigantic SL rubber zones into these little, almost like SL rubber squares that were still super grippy on the ball, but just a lot more malleable on the upper. Still had the facet frame, which was stupid, but as a whole, a big improvement on the Edge. And a solid boot, especially the low-cut lace ones. And finally, that brings us to, well, actually next year and right now with the Predator Elite FT, which is basically the pinnacle of like 30 years of innovation. So what you get here is a bit of a continuation from where the Accuracy left off. They've updated the Hybrid Touch upper, so it's still super soft, but a little bit thinner. Obviously, they've added the fold-over tongue to give you that Predator vibe, but it's still super soft and very nice to play with. And then, of course, they've also gone from the little squares to the strike skin upper, which are back to being these almost little brushes of SL rubber that takes us back to the Mania and the Precision. And it just feels really grippy, very nice on foot because of the new last, and the lightest Predator ever made, 215 grams. And arguably, at least to play with for me, the best Predator ever. I know it sounds weird because it's the new one, you should all go and buy it, but genuinely, hand on my heart, out of all of these, this is the one I would wear today. So yeah, that was a lot of football boots, and obviously really cool to see all of the Predators in one place. But the big question is, of course, which is your favorite Predator, and in your book, the best Predator ever? Well, as always, you should let me know in the comment section right down below. And then remember that if you want to try the new Predator Elite FT, or the regular Elite, or the latest one, you can get it all from Unisport right over there. Of course, also don't forget to subscribe to the channel with the notifications on. And with those words, I'm just gonna hang around here and look more at these. Signing off, cheerio.